Good morning.
Good morning.
How are you today?
Good. Nice to see you.
Very nice to see you too. Thank you so much for agreeing to chat with me. I am very grateful. Thank you. Thank you. So may I ask you please to tell us your name?
Absolutely. Steve Columbaro.
Thank you so much for that. And would you please share a little bit about yourself? Anything you feel comfortable sharing, career, whatever, education, anything you wish to share?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So my career started in 1997 when I graduated from Duke University. I should back up a tad and say that when I was in high school, I was particularly good in math and science, and my counselor had said, you might want to consider engineering. And I applied to schools that had engineering programs and went to Duke as in the engineering school, the Pratt Engineering School. And then about halfway through, just decided that while I still liked math and science, engineering didn't seem like it was a good fit for me. And that's for a whole host of reasons I won't necessarily get into here, but talked to my parents and said, hey, is there something else I should pursue or I should consider pursuing? Because I don't think I've found the right path. And what I settled on was basically the closest thing I could take at Duke to a business degree, which was economics and public policy studies. At that time, there's no undergraduate finance courses to speak of, and no undergraduate business program. But those kind of two areas interested me, and I thought were a good fit. So that's, I ended up with a major in public policy studies and a minor in economics, and started my career when I graduated in 97 after 4 years at Duke, and started in finance. Originally for First Union in Charlotte. I was there for about 6 years. Started out in a research capacity after having the kind of initial training program there, and then spent almost 5 years in their private equity group. So basically making investments with the bank's balance sheet in private companies. And First Union then became Wachovia. And so kind of finished my career in Charlotte after 6 years there in the firm was called Wachovia Capital Partners, right? So I had gotten a lot of wonderful experience, great people I worked with, looked at a lot of transactions, really felt like I understood the nuts and bolts of private equity and corporate finance and what it means to be on a board. I was on two board of directors at that time, worked on evaluating investments and then monitoring once we made them. And then, I kind of got promoted from analyst to associate to vice president. So became more and more involved in the transactions as I kind of worked my way up. And so just kind of loved my experience there, and then wanted to go and get a graduate degree. Wanted to pursue an MBA and applied to a variety of places, and ended up going to the Anderson School at UCLA. So got my MBA from UCLA in 2006. I initially got exposed to the Los Angeles area because one of the companies I worked with while I was in Charlotte was based in Los Angeles, and I used to go out there for board meetings, and so it's kind of nice out here. Maybe I'll apply to UCLA, and so that's where I ended up going. And then upon graduation from UCLA, I got a job at a investment firm in kind of not far from the Manhattan Beach area, in a town called El Segundo, and basically started out as an analyst there. It was a little different role than I had in private equity. It was a credit analysis role. So I worked for a firm that invested in non-investment grade debt securities, loans and bonds, and started out as an analyst and did that for quite some time. worked my way up while I was at that firm for about 15 years, worked my way up to eventually being a kind of a key employee in the marketing efforts that we did, primarily for raising money with outside institutional investors. I also was a senior portfolio manager on 3 different funds, and then was promoted to deputy head of my team. And so had a successful career. Wasn't there, but for 15 years it wasn't all roses. That was during part of my tenure there. The financial crisis happened in 2008, 2009, and certainly from an investment perspective, made a bunch of mistakes that I learned from. I really believe that you have to make those kind of mistakes to become better at it as an investor. And that's how you learn in anything in life, really. It's the mistakes you make. And so I was thankful for the experience I had there, and what I learned, and felt like by the time I had kind of finished my 15-year tenure there, that I had accomplished basically everything I wanted to accomplish at that firm. And at that time, that was 2020, that was in the midst of the pandemic. I know that it feels to me as though I would have made the decision anyway, but it's hard to say that because the decision I made to leave my career was during the pandemic. So it perhaps played a role. But I was feeling as though my my sort of reason for being at that firm kind of no longer made sense. The dynamics of the job, from a whole host of different angles, just kind of didn't make sense to me anymore. And started to say, okay, well, maybe I'll just do kind of what I'm doing for someone else. And kind of thought through that and just said, I actually don't think I want to do this work anymore. And basically took some time in 2020, perhaps when we all slowed down and got locked down, to say, okay, what do I really want to do with my life? How do I define success? What do I want the next chapter to include? How do I want it to feel? Because I didn't have a specific job that I wanted. In other words, it wasn't as simple as leaving one and going to another, or sending resumes to a handful of firms that were my target firms, as an example. It wasn't that way for me. It was, I really don't know what I'm going to do next. But okay, that's not a good answer. What are the things that I like doing, or what are the things I think I could be good at? And what I settled on was some element of service. It would either be teaching, coaching, volunteering. When I've been in those roles on a personal basis, I'll give you an example. When I was in LA, I volunteered at the UCLA Children's Hospital for about 4 years and put in about 500 plus hours of service there. And I mean, I look at that experience as some of the most joyful of my life. When I say the word joyful and hospital in the same sentence, and it may sound a little odd, but it really, I really felt as though, that was time well spent. I was better for it. I felt like the people I spent time with were better for it. And when I really reflected, I was like, yeah, that's how I want the next chapter to feel. And it's not going to feel like that every day.
Right.
But I want it to have that feeling. And so that's why I kind of started thinking about those kind of roles that I mentioned. And so I said, well, now that I've sort of decided on a general path, like where would I want to do this? Do I still want to do it in Los Angeles? And the short answer is, as an only child, I wanted to be a little closer to my mom and dad. They live in the Southeast. And Also, not knowing where my next dollar of income was going to come from. It's quite expensive in California. So I said, hey, is there a place that I could go where it's there are probably going to be a lot of opportunities in this area, that is a more reasonable cost of living and also a little closer to mom and dad. And that's kind of how I settled back in North Carolina. And I thought that being in the Research Triangle would be a great spot for me because a lot of universities here, focus on academics in this part of the country. And so if I was going to teach at the college level, perhaps there'd be some good options, was sort of my thinking. And so now what I've been doing is volunteering with the economics department at Duke. And, I am simply on a volunteer basis, been doing some advising of students who are looking at getting into finance, and kind of helping them think through the milestones in the interview process, how to think about resumes, what the various jobs actually look like when you're there. What does it mean to pursue different kind of career paths, and sort of help them think through, just the day-to-day of it. It can be stressful for folks to try to figure out how to get from, being a sophomore in college to having a great career, and sort of helping people sort of step back and say, hey, let's just kind of one step at a time. What are the things we need to do to kind of pursue an internship? And then how do we think about the job after that? And what do they all look like? And so that's been an enjoyable process. And then also, they've been nice enough, the economics department's been nice enough to let me guest lecture. So I did a lecture a couple weeks ago and just loved it. I just really enjoy the interaction with the students and kind of taking an area where I have some expertise based on 24 years of a career that I could utilize to maybe, help some of the folks there that want to learn more about, the areas that I know about, and also hopefully, inspire them in a way to enjoy the topic and enjoy the class and think about how, a career can be fulfilling in that field. I ultimately made a decision to leave it, but that was 24 years later. So I had a good run, and have a lot of great feelings about the things that I did in the various roles I had. So that's kind of part of the goal too. So long story short, I don't know what the next chapter is going to look like. I don't know if it's going to stay on this path, but I feel good about making a change. I feel good about where I live now. I feel good about the people I've been meeting. I feel good about the areas that I want to focus on and that I've thought those through, and also in my heart they feel right, and so we'll kind of see where it goes. Yep.
Thank you. That's very, very good. I have several questions. The first question is some definitions. So what does private equity mean?
Yep. So private equity means investing in a private company.
So in other words, if you bought stock in Facebook or Amazon or something like that, is that considered private equity?
So Facebook and Amazon are public companies.
Awesome.
Right.
Private companies.
So
companies
private
that have not gone public.
Exactly.
Okay.
Right. And they're companies that they may want to go public later in their life. They may never go public, but they're not traded on the public markets, right? They're private companies. So it's investing in the equity, in other words, the shares or the ownership of that private company. There are firms out there that provide debt or loans to those companies, and so there's also lending in a private company. In the private equity world, that's not what I was doing. We were buying the equity or owning the business. So that's what that means.
And how is that different from, say, a venture capitalist that invests in a startup or some new company? How do you separate private equity from that type of investment from venture capitalists?
Great question. So it's a little bit of the nomenclature of it. In other words, private equity broadly, if you want to kind of broadly define it, would include venture capital.
Oh.
It's the same concept,
Thank
right? Or you're purchasing an ownership in a private company, right? So it's the same concept. The way it tends to be used, though, in the industry is people tend to refer to venture capital as much earlier stage. Perhaps a company that has a product but no revenue, as an example, or just very early stages in their revenue cycle. Whereas private equity in the industry tends to refer to more mature companies.
Okay.
So, for example, a leveraged buyout of a public company, or providing growth equity in a business that's more established but is still private. So that's kind of the way it tends to be used in the industry, but at the core, they're basically the same.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And then another term you used was portfolio. What does, like, when you think of college, you may have a portfolio of all your work, all the things you've done. What is a portfolio in the financial sense?
Yeah, portfolio is kind of how you would think of, if you had a 401k with a handful of stocks or a handful of mutual funds in it, that would be a portfolio, okay. Right? And so in my old job, we were managing portfolios. So in my case, it happened to be debt investments, not equity investments, but the same concept applies. We had, a handful of investments that we were managing in a portfolio that for a particular client. So in the case of two of the funds I managed, it was for one specific institutional client. We were managing a portfolio of investments. In another fund, it was what we call a retail fund, which was you and me, right? So individuals. Yeah. And so individuals would own that fund, and I would be responsible for choosing the investments that would go into that fund. So when I say portfolio, I mean a collection of investments.
Excellent. A couple of non-financial questions. Do you know Lawrence Baxter at Duke?
I do not.
I would suggest you connect with Lawrence. Lawrence worked for Wachovia for a gazillion years, and then he decided to become a professor. He teaches in the law school at Duke, and I will send you his contact information, or I'll connect the two of you so you can talk to him. I think, he has a similar story as you do. He's from South Africa, but he came to America, got all of his stuff. I think he graduated from Duke as well. Duke's, I don't know if there's law school. I don't know. He did something in finance.
Yeah.
So I'll connect you to him.
Oh, that would be great. I'd love to meet him.
Another is Bill Brown. Do you know Bill Brown?
Oh, I know the name. What is he doing now?
Bill Brown is a professor at Duke Law. He came back, so he worked for Bloomberg for a number of years and did some other things, and then he came to Duke to teach, and then he started 8 Rivers Capital. And so what they're an environmental company. They're located here in Durham. I think last time I saw, it was close to $1 billion company what he started, and he does some amazing work considering I think he used his financial background. And then the next person I'll ask you is, do you know Sarah Raskin? Sarah was the deputy of the Federal Reserve, and she was also the governor of the Maryland Reserve.
Yeah, I know who she is. I don't know her personally.
I'll connect you to her too. I mean, you may find just common conversations. Sarah does some amazing work for everyone. She does a little bit for Duke, but she does some amazing work in the financial space. And her husband is a congressman. He's Jamie Raskin. So I'll connect you to those 3 people. And
that's very kind of you.
You can chat with them. So I want to go back and talk about some of the things that you said. I think it's a very impressive story to hear, your experiences, and then to, give it all up. I think that's pretty impressive. But I think what stuck with me the most was when you talked about making mistakes. And I always encourage people, failure is absolutely necessary. And if you look at your life, when you learn to walk, you failed a number of times when you stood up and walked. You know, when you
For
learned to
sure.
ride a bicycle, you know, you fell off the bicycle. Failure is absolutely necessary. And a lot of us take failure as, oh my God, this is the worst. You know, and you always often use Bill Clinton as my best example of failure and recovery,
Sure.
right? So whatever his scandal was, but look at who he is now, you know, and who he became.
Yep.
So if you can overcome yourself in failure, you know, how you see yourself in failure, it's a very important lesson to learn. If you don't fail, you don't succeed, you know, and so I think that's very important. And the way you described it, I think it was absolutely wonderful because, you know, you were able to see and grow from your failures, and that's a very important process.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said, and thank you for pointing that out. And I believe what you said wholeheartedly. I might even go a step further and say one thing I've noticed, or I've talked to some friends about in the past, is it's not always true, but in a lot of cases, the people that are the most successful, they tend to be doing enough things that they fail more.
Right.
They fail more than most people because they're trying so many different things. And you know, I wish personally that even though I made my fair share, I frankly wish I would have made more, because
Yeah.
it probably would have meant that I was doing more, and I was taking more risk, not indiscriminate risk, but I was taking more risk, and that would have been probably in my best interest.
Absolutely. All of us. The same thing is true for all of us.
Yep.
So when you decided to leave your career you had been in for a long time, did
Yep.
you have moments where you second guessed your decision to leave? I mean, not after you left, but in the process where you're thinking, okay, I'm going to retire from this industry. Did you
Yep.
have moments before you decided that you thought, well, maybe not?
Yeah, about 5 minutes ago. No.
I love it.
uh,
Love it.
no, I'll tell you two things on that. First of all, you know, I feel like, you know, maybe this is a shameless plug, but I feel like the word retirement is kind of thrown around, and the reality is that I was offered the opportunity to stay and actually was promoted, and I turned it down because I didn't want to do it. And so one of the things that's given me a lot of confidence in this process is I left on my own terms. I left when I had accomplished everything I wanted to accomplish where I was. I had, you know, I left on my own volition. And so it wasn't as if I look back on it and say, oh gosh, you know, I wish they wouldn't have told me to leave, or I wish that, you know, I would have done X, Y, or Z. I don't wish any of that. I knew I thought it through. I had spent the time to make a thoughtful decision, and I left on my own terms. So I tend to rely on that a lot.
Yeah.
But the answer to your question is all the time, every day, I second guess it every single day, because I can't help it. It part of, I mean, one day hopefully I'm not saying that to you, but for right now I can't help it. It's only been you know, my last day was, you know, August of last year. So it's only been about 7 months. And there's still a part of me that identifies myself with 24 years of a prior career. And so it's hard to wake up in the morning and say, well, guess I'm not doing that. I thought that's who I was. And so I worry about that all the time. But, you know, I take a breath and I remember why I did this. I try to be grateful for what I experienced, and also be kind to myself. You know, hey, you know, you took a chance here that you know is right, and you know there's going to be bumps in the road. That's okay, but I feel great about having agency and making the decision. You know, I'm excited about that, but I have to remind myself about it every day, and that's okay. You know, that's part of the process. Maybe a year from now or so, I won't feel the same. But yeah, I always second guess it, and I think it's important to say that, right? I think it's important because I think sometimes people say, "Well, gosh, don't know how I'll feel if I'll do that. Yeah, you're not going to feel great, but it doesn't mean it wasn't the right decision.
Yeah,
Um, and so that's kind of where I'm at on that. If I don't know if I gave you a good enough answer.
perfect. I think what you said about being kind to yourself is absolutely beautiful. I think that people need to remember that we tend to beat up ourselves about small things, things when we're second guessing, or did we make the right decision? And I think that when you can be kind to yourself and forgive or allow yourself to be who you are, what you decided, as opposed to holding that as some kind of harm to yourself. I think that's beautiful that you said that. So I want to ask you this. So you said that you get a lot of joy out of the volunteering and doing
Yep.
things for others. I think that's part of your character. That's just part of who you are. And I mean, even if you're working a full-time job and someone needed you to help, I think you would step in and help. So I don't think that's a unique thing that you became. I think it was always a part of who you were. But
Yep.
let me ask you this. So in terms of volunteering, do you find yourself giving more than you would normally give because you're not doing your job? You're not the 25-year career person. So when you're going in to volunteer for someone, are you trying to make yourself feel like you're contributing the same thing you contributed when you were in your 25-year job?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think that would be a natural pitfall,
Yeah.
right? So I'm totally with you on that. In my case, actually, no, because I was very, very careful in this process to say, okay, you're making a tough change. Don't let it get away from you. Be very deliberate about what you do and think it through, and don't overextend yourself. In other words, don't feel I've pushed back on my inclination to want to take charge of the situation and get as much done as I can. And yeah, I'm still. If I showed you the things I'm doing, I think you'd say that I'm working on quite a few things. But I've been very deliberate not to overextend myself because I knew that would be natural to do. If anything, to fill the void of not having a traditional career at this stage. So I've been careful to avoid that. So I'm not there yet. Now, hey, if we talk in 6 months, maybe I'll be there. Who knows, right? But I'm trying to be careful right this moment.
So not to extend yourself too much, to keep some for yourself so you can enjoy yourself, such as watching the Masters with your nice Masters.
Exactly. That will be part of it. That would be part of it.
Yeah.
But look, I think just I think the concept of retiring, or I just think once you stop working hard, you're on a decline, right? You're not pushing yourself to be better. And so I'm definitely going to want to do more than I'm doing today, but I'm trying to be, like I said, be deliberate about it and really feel like, okay, is this something that I'm really excited about doing, or am I just doing it because I'm scared?
Yeah.
Right. And that's kind of the decision I'm trying to make.
Yeah. I think that in my instance, so in 2020, Duke Law eliminated my position. And Duke Health was nice enough to offer me a job. And I don't think I did any of those things on my terms because I was always afraid. I didn't know what I would do if I didn't work in IT, or if I wasn't leading some kind of IT organization. And when I first left, I thought immediately about going back. Like, I'm going back. I'm going to go find a job. And slowly, first I had to take a moment to relax, right? I didn't have anything on my plate to do, so just relax and unwind. But I didn't realize that starting my own business in which I can help people was the best thing I could do, because the thing that I am best at, although I'm an excellent IT person, what I am best at is helping people. And that's what I've done my whole career, and specifically in the space where I work. So in diversity and inclusion, there's so much of that that's talked about now, but in reality, people are trying to, distance themselves from that. So I think what I learned in my career part, where I ended what I did, was making sure you find something that aligns with who you are and what you love. So if you enjoy
Yes.
it, it's not hard to do, and so as I'm standing up my own business, there's so much I don't know. I don't know how to do this. I don't know where this, but finding those things out and learning gives me another level that I can help people. So when the next person says, hey, I'm thinking about starting a business, I can give you some advice, or I can connect you to someone who can help you
Yeah.
get started. And I think that's what's beautiful about being not in a 9-to-5 job, where you can really, if your mission is to do for others, you'll find very interesting ways to do that. And I think you've done that. I think that's a part of what you've described in your retirement.
Yeah. Well, I love what you said, and what the word that comes to mind when you said that is authenticity, right? There's something to be said as you think about how you define success in your life, being authentic versus just doing something because you think you should.
Because it pays the bills, right?
And I understand that, we all have to pay the bills. So it's not that easy all the time, but, hopefully it's a long life, right? And hopefully one day we can find something more authentic to who we are, even if we're not in that spot at the moment, right?
And I will say that when you're in this place, and I think you might agree with me on this, you have a lot of questions about why you're doing this or what you're doing. I mean, even when you think I have enough money to do this, I have enough, but you're always worrying about what could possibly happen. And I advise people to not wallow in that. You can think about that. You can say, oh, about this, should I be doing this? Should I be doing that? I think what you should be doing is what you love, because the opportunity like you and I have is to decide what you want to do, to decide to go this place or not, and not spend a lot of time thinking about the what ifs, what could,
Yeah.
what should, because you never know. Life is very challenging all the time, and there are pitfalls everywhere you go.
Yep.
You have to be able to get up when you get in one of those pitfalls and move to the next place, and not let it derail your path. And I think
Right.
if you can think about that in terms of career and work and community, I think it's very important that we find a way to, avoid those pitfalls that pull us away from what we found that we love. So instead of going back to finance or going back in IT,
Yeah.
whatever it is, find what you love. Now, if those things are things you love, have at it. But if it's not, find things that you really enjoy. And in your career, you should have found things that you like doing, like maybe you're a writer or a painter or something, those kinds of things.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I do think for me anyway, I started off, maybe this is kind of how I've done everything in life, but I started off just trying to read as much as I could and try to, talk to people that could help me think through it. The reality is that helped a little, but I eventually had to do the thing.
Yourself.
I eventually had to do the thing knowing that it might not be right.
Right.
And then kind of convince myself in a way that what's the worst case scenario? The worst case scenario is none of the 6 things I try work out. And then I go find something else that pays the bills that I used to do. And it might take a little longer to get there, but if you really, at least, as I thought about it, like you really play out, like what's the worst case scenario? The worst case scenario is you go find a job. And
absolutely.
it might take a moment, but you make it. But the going through life knowing that in my case that I never tried to do something that I thought I really would love was not acceptable for me. But not everybody thinks about work that way, but that's kind of how I think about it. And I frankly, I wish I would have, started this journey sooner, but it's okay. It's good to do it now.
Absolutely. So we are almost out of time. Let me ask you, do you have something you want to say that we haven't covered, or something you want to talk about that we haven't talked about?
I think I've probably said more than I need to. So,
I think it's beautiful.
I appreciate the, the safe space to share it. And I appreciate you, you giving me the time to do so. And thank you.
Absolutely. I'm going to turn the recording off now, but please don't hang up, please.